a long-term dispute. I think it's fair to call it a long-term dispute now over pay and terms and conditions with education professionals on the Isle of Man. When did this begin first?
Yeah, the negotiations and the dispute have been going on for about 18 months now. And basically on the Isle of Man, all teachers are paid roughly the same as they would have been paid in England. And we work out pay according to the English agreements. And this is important in terms of recruitment. So each year we have an annual pay award, which is published in a document called the School's Teacher Pay and Conditions document. But although that's always implemented here in full, and it's been the same since 1992.
Is that basically an inflationary increase?
More than that. It goes right across the board, and we have similar agreements in terms of in terms of doctors and GPs on the island, just to have that link with the UK. But what happened last year was that various of the teacher unions disagreed with that. They said that they needed more money to make up for inflationary pressures on the Isle of Man, and that they wanted a separate pay deal from above and beyond that. And we've been having negotiations right the way through November, December. We had a very extensive negotiation in March the 17th, and I was just in as minister at that point and was really hopeful that we could have an agreement. And it was a good offer. Unfortunately, it was seen as unacceptable.
They want 9% on top.
That's correct. So the last year, 2019 to 2020, it was 2.75%. They were paid that, but they want 3% on top of that each year for the next 3 years. They also want quite a substantial amount of money, 1.75 million as a one-off deal, and we had these sort of discussions in March the 17th, the discussions ended with the offers being seen as unacceptable by the trade unions, and then the world changed, and we're now facing a completely different environment. Now we are still quite happy to go along with the pay increase that's always been negotiated, but today we sat down with the unions, and the Isle of Man government was trying to be honest with them about the changed economic situation, but they've still stuck to this really quite high pay settlement, which is, I think, completely unaffordable.
So basically, if I've interpreted this correctly, Treasury said there's no money. Is that the basic explanation of what's happened today?
Yeah, Treasury have said that there's no new money. We do have built into the budget 2% to pay wages, and anything on top of that we'd normally have to find through what are called efficiency savings. Now, these aren't cuts to services necessarily. Sometimes it's postponing things that you want to do. As a department, we're absolutely dedicated to not cutting education for the children of this island. But money has to come from somewhere if we're going to increase pay to this extent. We're quite happy to sit down with the unions again. They're going to be given an invitation to come back and see the various officers next week, and by next week we'll have the English agreement in terms of what the pay increase will be there, and I'm quite happy to negotiate based on that. But I think in the same week as the Treasury Minister has indicated that he may need to take out a £250 million overdraft for the Isle of Man government to deal with short-term cash flow problems. Next week we've got an extensive meeting of Tynwald when we'll be dealing with the budget statement, which is quite grim in some ways. We're dealing with perhaps one of the biggest economic downturns we've ever seen worldwide that will affect us, and how we get our economy through that, and also deal with what seemed to be at the beginnings of the pandemic quite a large rise in unemployment as well. We've got lots of jobs to do, and I am disappointed that some of the English union representatives didn't seem to understand that change in the circumstances on the Isle of Man. I've got utmost respect for teachers on the Isle of Man, but I do think that some of their representatives need to actually get out there and see what has been a real change in the economic climate on the island.
You mentioned that negotiations were paused on the 17th of March. That coincided with you coming into this role. Of course, it's something you've inherited, essentially. Talks resumed today. We could sort of infer that perhaps we were moving closer towards some sort of compromise in the spring. Have we now taken a step back away from that again?
I thought that the deal in March was very good, and I pressed for it. I thought it was a good settlement that dealt particularly with recruitment.
You would say that, though, wouldn't
Yeah,
you?
no, absolutely. It was rejected. So rejected as being completely unacceptable by the union. So we had to start again. Unfortunately, as I said, the world's changed since then, and some of the extra money that Treasury had promised has already been spent on keeping people in work and on dealing with those people who've been made unemployed. And right across the government, people are now looking at where we spend our money. And so unfortunately, some of that money that was on the table in March isn't there anymore. As a minister, though, and as a department, we still want to get a just, fair settlement for teachers on this island. But at the same time, it has to be fair for the taxpayer and for the people of this island. And I think the statement made by the unions after the talks this morning wasn't very helpful. They said it was shameful, and they also said that the government had refused to enter in any negotiations other than to discuss cuts. No, actually, we are keen to negotiate a settlement. We are keen to end what has been 18 months of dispute, which hasn't done anyone any good. It certainly hasn't done teachers any good. I don't think it's done pupils or parents any good. So we are absolutely keen on settling this, but we also need an injection of reality here.
You said when you took on this role in the Council of Ministers that it was one of, if not your main priority, to solve this and to come to some sort of resolution. Parents and guardians aren't particularly interested, I would say, in intricacies of the argument on either side. All they see is tit for tat between the Isle of Man government and these unions. And ultimately, whether in practice or in perception, the people who lose out are the children.
Absolutely. And I think we need to remember that children and their parents and families are at the heart of our education service. That's why teachers come into the profession. They don't come into the profession to go on strike. They don't come into the profession to argue. Unfortunately, this whole dispute, I think, has soured relationships between one union and another, between one teacher and another in some cases, and certainly between the teaching community and the department. I am keen to try as much as I can to repair that, but it's made very difficult for me to do that if some of the statements that are made by unions such as today come out, and also if there seems to be a bit of intransigence from the unions to actually see some of the economic reality that's going on the islands at the moment.
It seems that the unavoidable trajectory of this and the way that this is going is that it will result in strike action ultimately from education professionals on the island without preempting the result of any ballots of members of the individual unions. The policy or the stance from both sides all along has been there will be an effort to stop the impact on children and on learning as much as possible. Is that going to change now?
Well, that's very much up to the unions in some ways, because the NAS UWT have balloted again on strike action or action short of strike. Action short of strike can include things like after school clubs, can include extra sessions for pupils.
And that's happened already, hasn't it?
It has indeed. And I know that's affected some pupils and affected some families. And I think that's extremely regretful, because what we all want, what I want, what teachers want, and particularly what parents and pupils want, is a good education system. And I think we have that on the island. And we need to settle this pay dispute and move forward.
But you can have the best education system in the world, but children haven't been at school for a number of weeks. They've got this ongoing in the background for 18 months now.
Yep.
It's not a particularly good outlook for people who are studying at the minute.
Absolutely, and we need to insulate them from some of this. I think the adults in the room, the teaching unions and the department need to sit down, need to get a settlement, but need to be realistic about what can be achieved, given everything else that's going on in the world at the moment, and particularly on our island. We are in a good position health-wise, but we can see around us the reality of the economic conditions, and we need to get a settlement that's just. As I said, the department is looking forward to England publishing their planned pay increase next week. We're then keen to sit down with the unions and negotiate on that. But what we can't do, hand on heart, is talk about a 9% increase and a £1.75 million payout.
Is it your job to effectively lobby Treasury and fight the cause of the department to try and eke out some more of the cash that is left?
Absolutely, and I was doing that in March and trying to get a good settlement that unfortunately was rejected. The issue now is that all government departments are lobbying Treasury, and Treasury are under stress, and that will come out in the budget statement next week by the Treasury Minister. We need, as a government, to work constructively to keep the economy going, to keep people in jobs, and for those unemployed people due to coronavirus and the pandemic, to get them back into jobs through reskilling.
Are we at risk of neglecting long-term supply-side policies effectively in favour of political short-termism here?
I'm going into this with a long-term viewpoint. As I said, we've got a pay negotiation that's been going on since 1992 that's got a good formula that works there. Now, some of the union representatives will claim that their overall incomes have been eroded due to inflation over the last decade by 30%. The same thing has happened to a lot of people in society. What we need to do is actually recognise the value of education, which I'm quite happy to talk about, recognise the value of teachers and the fact that they need decent pay, but also recognise the value of our education service and our wider economy. Those students who are currently at school who want jobs in a couple of years' time when they come out, and some of them will be coming out this summer, we need to make sure they have a future. And that's why the economic environment has to be maintained, has to be protected by Treasury.